Excellent work. Now we will be moving into more advanced memory systems. Let's start off with the very basic one, right? The PEG memory system, right? This is a very powerful system that allows you to remember items in order, forwards and backwards. So if I call out a number and I say, well, remember item number 7, you should be able to recall it. Or remember item number 6, you should be able to recall it instantly. You should be able to recall these items in chronological order, right? From number 1 to number 10, from number 10 to number 1, or randomly in any order, right? With spaced repetition, again, as was mentioned, you can remember these items for more than several days. For years, in fact, I've used the system to remember pieces of information for well over 5 years, right? You'll be introduced to two PEG systems that will allow you to remember 20 items. Later on, the system will be proposed that will allow you to remember 1,000 items, right? Using pegs. So you have to understand what a peg is, and I'll be able to demonstrate to you, hopefully, by the end of this lecture. So the peg system that will be introduced is called a number-shaped system, right? So the number-shaped system allows you to remember information by turning numbers into a familiar shape, right? So for example, the number 1 may look like a pen, it may look like a chess piece, it may look like a toothbrush. So it all depends on how our mind works. So after we generated the images for our pegs for numbers 0 to 9, right? So after we've generated these images, we may then use these images to remember information. I'll demonstrate how this is done by again try to memorize a list of words or items. So let me handle you through the process of going about developing your peg system, the number shape system. So let's start with 0. So 0 is often associated with a ball, with an egg, with the moon. So think of an object whose shape reminds you of the number 0. Remember that our minds may not work the same. So write it down. So whichever item springs to mind when you think of 0. So I want you to write that down on a piece of paper. So please do this exercise and create a number shape system. And we will proceed with this very same procedure later on in all the upcoming pegs that we will create. And proceeding with this exercise, right? Number 1 may be represented by a pencil, a candle, or a stick, right? So think of your own image or the image that sticks out to you. Write it down. Excellent work. So now for the number 2. The number 2 could be visualized as a swan, a duck, or an object that has a similar shape to the number 2. So for example, here we have a swan. Kind of reminiscent of the number 2, right? So write whatever image comes in mind that reminds you of the number 2, or that sort of looks like the number 2. Now for the number 3. So number 3 is often associated with a heart, a pair of lips, buttocks, or a butterfly. So here, sort of looks like the number 3. So follow my laser pointing annotation here. Excellent. So for number 4. Number 4 can look like a chair, a sailboat, a flag, an object of a similar shape. So it sort of looks like the number 4 here. I don't know if you can see. So let me just highlight this. So it sort of looks like a 4. Right? Your chair might look like a 4. Or you might think of a sailboat. So something like this. So it resembles the number 4 in some way. Excellent work. Now proceeding further. Number 5. Number 5 sort of looks like a hook, a seahorse, or any object of a similar shape. So as you can see here, this hook here sort of looks like the number 5 now. So if you think of 5, right, sort of reverse it, well, sort of looks like the number 5. Here the number 6, it looks like a golf club, a pipe, or any object of a similar shape. So let's demonstrate this. Sort of looks like a number 6, right? Now number 7 might look like a club, a boomerang, right, a cliff, or an object of similar angular shape. So this sort of looks like the number 7 here. Number 8 could be visualized as a snowman, hourglass, or a similar object with a similar, right, double circle shape. So hourglass here sort of looks like the number 8. It's highlighted here. Of course, the other objects, of course, you could think of a snowman and so forth and so on. So whichever object is sort of salient to you, our brains work differently, so we can use different images. So number 9, it looks like a lollipop, right, or an object of a similar shape, or even a balloon, right? So a balloon can sort of resemble the number 9. You show this, right? So it sort of looks like the number 9. Excellent work. Now proceeding further. Congratulations. Congratulations. Now you have increased the PEG system or PEG memory capacity by 10. So I want you to look at the number of image pairs that you've generated on your piece of paper. Review them and remember them well. Let's look at the practical example of how these pegs may be used to remember information. So to do this, we will remember a shopping list. So brace yourself. So the shopping list that you will intend to remember will be bunny, banana, remember, honey, liquid soap, strawberries, flour, toothpaste, margarine, butter, tomatoes, tea bag, and bread. So we'll use all of these pegs to remember. Now, remember this system that we've come up with is zero indexed, right? You can actually start from 1 if you want to, and I'll just show you a quick trick here. So we can go from 1 to 10. What does 10 look like? 10 may look like a racket, and a ball. Racket and a ball. So you can just think of a racket, like a tennis racket, right? However, we'll start from 0. So we use 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth and so on. Proceeding further. Again, just as a reminder, the elements of memory still apply, right? The principles of memory are still there. Order, sequence, number, substitution, touch, smell. We have to use all of our senses. We have to use imagination, association, humor, rhythm, movement, taste. Yeah, we can feature all unique images. You don't have to follow my direct instructions. Right? I'm just teaching you the fundamentals. Let's start from 0. We'll start with a banana. So your peg image was, let's say it was a moon, right? Think of a large banana hanging from the moon, right? The bananas may be rotten. The smell of the rotting, I smell the rotting banana, right? See them in 3 dimensions, right? Add motion such as them dangling, right? So you can think of these bananas dangling from the moon. Use all of your senses, use color, taste, rhythm, smell, right? Smell the rotting bananas, right? And so forth and so on. Moving on. Now, number 2, think of honey, right? So we have to store it in our peg for 1. So our peg for 1, let's just say, was the image of a pen or a pencil. I think of a very small pen we use in size here that uses to have very large, giant jar, right, filled with honey. So you're using this very ridiculously small pen to stare at this very giant jar filled with honey. So we're using 2 elements here. We're using exaggeration, making things bigger. We're using contraction, making things smaller. Perhaps you stare at a jar, see the golds, yellows, and oranges. You can also use smells. You can also use sound. So add as many elements as possible. This will make the image as memorable as possible. Moving on to number 2, like you may imagine yourself aggressively washing a swan with dishwashing liquid, right? So the swan may be struggling in the process. So imagine the swan honking loudly in process. See the color of the soap on the swan's feathery body. Number 3. So we're going to, we're going to be using peg number 3, but this is number 4, strawberry. So now if you use lips for number 3, for example, then imagine many lips kissing a giant red shiny strawberry. So you can think all these lips making all these sucking and kissing sounds and smacking sounds on this very giant strawberry, right? This strawberry may be shiny red. So add as many colors and as many elements as possible. So number 5 is flower. So we'll be using peg number 4. So for peg number 4, you could have used a chair, you could have used a sailboat. So let's say you use a sailboat. So use a sailboat for number 4, then imagine a giant bag of flour being poured on a sailboat. Imagine yourself on the sailboat being covered in flour. So see the plumes of the white smoke created by the flour. Might taste the flour on your tongue. So moving on to image number 6, which would be peg number 5. And it's say you use a pirate hook for peg number 5. So there you may imagine a hook clawing away at a giant tube of toothpaste. Right? You can see and taste and touch this toothpaste and spilling out of this giant, enormous tube of toothpaste. So imagine the toothpaste smearing the hook. As the hook penetrates the toothpaste tube. Imagine the smell, the taste for toothpaste, etc. Item number 7. So for item number 7, we'll be using the number 6. So if you use a smoking pipe for number 6, right, imagine a spoonful of butter at the bowl of the pipe. So if you think of a pipe, if you think of like the smoking pipe, so you can think of like a spoon full of butter. It is butter here and it's being poured into. So imagine the butter molten and dripping on the rusty, dirty, smoke green pipe. So imagine the smell and the bright yellow color of the butter. Number 8, tomatoes. So we'll use peg number 7. And I suppose you use the hockey club for peg number 7. So imagine playing hockey using tomatoes as the hockey ball. Imagine many tomatoes in the hockey ball field. Perhaps they're rotten, smell them, see the rotten tomatoes, but use all the elements of memory, etc. Number 9, tea bags. So for number 9, tea bags, we will be using peg number 8. Remember, we're starting from 0. So perhaps you chose an hourglass for your image. Imagine the bottom of an hourglass filled with the tea bags. Now sand from the top of this hourglass is maybe dripping down, pouring down on these tea bags, or these very large, enormous tea bags, wet tea bags. And you can see and hear the sand as it drops down on these tea bags. Right? You want to add color, you want to add sounds, you want to add touch, you want to add all the elements of memories that we discussed previously. Now moving on to the final item. The final item is bread. Now we'll be moving on to what? It's peg number 9. So let's say for peg number 9, you use the balloon as your image. Now perhaps you imagine a balloon carrying a rather large loaf of bread. Perhaps it's a kind of banana bread with raisins. Imagine the texture of the bread. Imagine imagine the balloons floating with the bread. Perhaps you might use number. In this case, you might use many balloons with hundreds and hundreds of loaves of bread. Or perhaps you may use many balloons carrying one very giant loaf of bread. Perhaps it's steaming. It's just fresh out of the oven. You can smell it. So forth and so on. And finally, I want you to review all of your items that you've memorized. So this initial review, this quick review is very important. It also helps fortify memory. So we'll review your images from 0 to 9, along with the memories you formed. This review is very important as it can fortify memory and help you remember these items for well up to a day or well up to 24 hours. So if you could not remember the same image or some of the images, then try to add more elements to them. So try to add all the elements of memory that we discussed before, right? Add more color, smell, exaggeration, contrasting humor, texture, motion, three-dimensionality, so forth and so on. And now I'd like to extend my congratulations. You now have a peg system, right, with 10 pieces of information, or you've increased your memory capacity using pegs by 10, so you can now remember any 10 items, right, forwards and backwards, right, or in random order. Say, I call out the number 5. So if what did 5 remind you of? 5 might have reminded you of the hook, which you're hooking away at the toothpaste. What does H remind you of? H might remind you of tea bags, what does two remind you of? Dishwashing liquid, so forth and so on, right? And I'll introduce, in the very next lecture, I'll introduce you to a new peg system, which is very similar to this one, which will allow you to remember 20 items in total, forwards and backwards.